The final date that the state claims Mrs. Crumbley had knowledge about back from March of 2021 are exhibits 96 through 100. And 96 starts off with their son saying, I'm picking up the room, I cleaned until the clothes started flying off the wall. This stuff only happens when I'm home alone. I pick the clothes back up though. And that's the important part of those texts on the 20th. We know on that date, because the people proved it, no pun intended, but they beat a dead horse, that at 97, it's a picture of Jennifer at the barn. We've got the metadata showing Jennifer was at the barn. We've got another picture on 99 showing Jennifer was at the barn. And exhibit 100, Jennifer was at the barn. Big deal. Jennifer's at the barn. Their son is saying goofy stuff. Jennifer gave you the context. They had an Ouija board for a couple months after Christmas of 2020. He and his friend are playing with the Ouija board. They ultimately lost interest. They stopped doing it. Jennifer admitted to you one day to mess with them. She turned the power off in the house, turned the circuit off to mess with them. She mentioned a time where James pretended he was getting electrocuted. She didn't know what to do. She's screaming, trying to kick him, see if he's electrocuted. Ethan is laughing, taking a video of the whole thing. This family played together. They had fun. They did what families do. The prosecution just had zero context because they had tunnel vision that she was doing something wrong and was grossly negligent, and they were hell-bent on convincing you that was the case. So the other thing that you can find as a reasonable doubt in the case is the lack of evidence in the case as a whole. The prosecution has made very serious claims. And when you really look at it, they have very little evidence. So what they've shown to you, and I have it in these folders, are these dates in March 2021, which, by the way, are 10 months before the shooting even took place. They're before it would have... it's unreasonable to expect that things that happened in March of 2021 are an indicator that 10 months later their son's going to do something. It would be very different if every week there's something going on up until the shooting, but there's not. Because if there was, the prosecution would have brought that in and showed you every horrible thing that was happening to show you their son was being ignored, and they don't have the evidence. So what they did provide and what was admitted, this is exhibit, I believe, 423. These are all the Facebook messages between James and Jennifer. So when you look at those Facebook messages and consider, and this includes the photographs and the GPS stuff, that they're using this much compared to this much over the period between January 2021 and the shooting. This is a very little bits in time compared to the grand scheme of things. And while the officer testified and played games with me that he's not sure this is the best evidence against Mother, you better believe if they had better evidence, they'd be up here showing stronger and better evidence. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. It's obvious from the evidence in trial, and you may find it to be a reasonable doubt, that the Crumbley son was a skilled manipulator, and they didn't realize it. He's not sick. He doesn't have a mental illness. He's had no history of hallucinations. He has never shown his parents signs of mental illness. He certainly never showed signs of mental illness wanting to get a gun. No parent would purchase a weapon if they believed their child had mental illnesses. And these are people that had 2 other guns in the house for months where nothing ever happened with those guns. They had no reason to believe that somehow this 3rd gun was the thing that was going to make the difference. The texts that the prosecution admitted as Exhibit 101 were texts between the shooter and his friend that we have not named. The extent of these text messages saying goofy things like, I told my dad to take me to the doctor, he gave me pills to suck it up, it's at the point I'm asking to go to the doctor, I'm having insomnia and paranoia, I'm calling 911, I thought about calling 911, but my parents would be pissed. I don't disagree with the prosecution that these are alarming messages, but clearly the shooter's friend isn't that alarmed because he's not texting back. The shooter's friend knows there must be more going on because he doesn't tell Mrs. Crumbley, who is like, and he's like a second child to her. And we have no other context about these messages, and if anything, the evidence does not show that Mrs. Crumbley ever saw these messages. Now, when she sees them now, she thinks, that's crazy. She'd like to know more context. But you also have to know, and another reasonable doubt you may find in this case, is created when you compare these text messages that were sent that have alarming things between Ethan and his friend to all of the messages between them, which are over 20,000. And what you would have to believe, and what I would believe, is that if the state had stronger evidence, they would have paraded it up and we would have been seeing a lot more of these. But instead, they were admitted, and you haven't heard the friend testify, you haven't heard any context about these, and all you can see, and really all the evidence shows, is that there's no reason to believe Mrs. Crumbley ever saw them. I don't want to have another Leaning Tower of Pisa situation. Move this down.
I'm watching.
I've taken your advice. Now, the other evidence the state has shown are little bits and pieces from the shooter's journal that are quite alarming and disturbing. But again, Mrs. Crumbley says the information in there about my parents won't listen to me for help is not true. And there is no evidence to show she ever saw that 22-page handwritten document. She never saw the little bits of evidence that the prosecution admitted. To evaluate this case, you have to look at it from the perspective of what she knew. So the journal information and the small amount of text compared to all the text with his friend are things she didn't know about. There's also 2 times where the state says that they have proof that Mrs. Crumbley's son was showing signs of depression or being sad or lonely. All right, those come from April 29th, 2001. This is when Jennifer Crumbley emails the friend, his mother, and all she says is that her son has been acting kind of depressed. She doesn't know what's going on. She's trying to find out what's going on, but he won't really tell her much. She's trying to find out if there's an issue between the 2 boys she should be aware of. She's trying to get down to the bottom of it. If anything, she's doing what a good mom does to try to figure it out. But the worst of what she says is that he's stressed by school. I don't want to get this wrong. He's been acting kind of depressed. And she's happy to hear it's not an issue between them. Then they go on to make plans for their son. This was admitted is Exhibit 104. If you put my texts up there and showed every time I told my mom that one of my kids was acting depressed or weird, I guess my favorite word is moody these days, it would look like my kids were complete lunatics. I'm actually shocked Jennifer Crumbley doesn't have more texts about her son acting like a typical teenager. And Jennifer Crumbley testified that although she said that, she didn't think it was anything she needed to run to a doctor about or anything she needed to do anything more with. And this moment passed, because if it didn't, the prosecution would have brought in all the texts that went beyond this, and there would be more evidence.